I'm Ken Godevanas, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems. Thank you once again for joining us today. I want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items first and foremost. Last time we were discussing whether Elijah was a Gentile or a Hebrew. I ended up on the Hebrew side, and I'm still there. But in the process, we asked the question of whether we had any Old Testament evidence of early converts to Judaism. I couldn't think of any. Well, one of our viewers, Andy C., asked, wasn't Ruth considered to be a Gentile convert? Great question. The Bible does not specifically say, quote, Ruth converted to Judaism. But Ruth chapter 2, verse 11, and especially verse 12, both suggest that she did. So thank you, Andy. Always love it when fellow students of the Bible help us out. In addition, even before that, there is argument that Sarah and Abraham led many out of heathenism into monotheism. One verse that is interpreted as suggesting that is Genesis chapter 12, verse 5. When Abraham left Haran, he took with him, quote, those he had brought into his household, end of quote. Now, some versions, like the King James Version and others, say, brought with them all those souls. Now, it may be a stretch, but if it is supported by Jewish writings. And I would ask, why would heathens join the household of a monotheistic man and leave their country and travel with him, not knowing where they were going or what they were going to face? Now, it is possible that these souls, or those acquired, were indeed slaves that he had accumulated for his household. But we're going to let you decide that. But wait, back to our original question. Any other evidence of Gentiles being converted to Judaism in the Old Testament? Well, yes, there actually is. Look at the story of Esther, where in chapter 8 of the book of Esther, chapter 8, verse 17, we read, quote, and many among the peoples of the land became Jews for the dread of the Jews. That's after Esther pulled off her great feat with God's help. The dread of the Jews had fallen on them, end of quote. Okay, that's settled. Let's move on to the question I left you with last time, where Elijah is quoted to say, quote, neither dew nor rain except by my word, end of quote. So who is the my in this except by my word? Is it God or is it Elijah? I believe that it is indeed intended to be by Elijah's word or command. Now, I say this for several reasons. First, all the various versions say the same thing, by my word or by my command, etc. Second, none of them capitalize the my to indicate that it refers to God, as some do. Third, in his statement, while Elijah refers to God, he does so more as a guarantor, as when a parent signs on with a bank as a guarantor for a loan to their child who may not have the same credit level and otherwise would not get the loan. He was not quoting God as the speaker. So I am satisfied that if there was to be rain or dew, it would only be at Elijah's command, and that this was how God himself had set it up. So with that in mind, we can now go on and study some more of the chapter, especially looking at especially looking at what happens immediately after Elijah makes that pronouncement. Let's look at 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 2 to 6. Now, verse 2 tells us that the word of the Lord came to Elijah after he made his proclamation. Verse 3 tells us God told him to leave Ahab's locale, I would say Samaria, and head eastward and hide himself by the brook of Kerith, or its valley, which was east of the Jordan. In verse 4, Elijah is told not to worry about water or food. God said he would drink from the brook, and that the ravens had been commanded to provide for him there. The NNT says, God told him, quote, I have already told the ravens to bring you food, end of quote. Wow. Clear evidence that our God, the Creator, communicates and instructs animals to do his will if he wants to. Who knows? If I keep finding insightful verses like these during my studies, I may even have to change my apathetic views on dogs and cats. But I'm not there yet, so don't get excited. In any case, I want us to note 4 things that happened in accordance with 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 to 4. In these 4 verses, we have 1, Elijah delivers a tough message from God. That's verse 1. 2, God comes to Elijah again. That's verse 2. 3, God instructs Elijah as to where to go and what to do. Verse 3. And 4, God arranges to provide for Elijah. Verse 4. Now, I think that we need to claim a similar process of events for ourselves as we carry out God's work. Act as God told us to do, wait for God, get direction, and trust in his care and provisions. Folks, it works. And notice God's leading was 1 step at a time. He didn't give Elijah all 4 steps. Verses 5 and 6 of our passage tell us that Elijah did just as God directed again. He went to the brook Cherith, he hid there, and he drank the fresh water. And the ravens also did their part. Each morning and each evening they brought him bread and meat. Now the drought announced by Elijah was a great threat to the northern kingdom of Israel and the reign of Ahab. Robert Jameson says, quote, at first the king may have spurned the prediction as the utterance of a vain enthusiast. But when he found the drought did last and increase in severity, he sought Elijah out, end of quote. His life was in danger, and thus God had sent him to the brook Cherith. Chuck Smith tells us he was gone for 3.5 years. And for 3.5 years there was a drought in the land, or drought in the land. Not a drop of rain, no dew from heaven until the land became very dry and parched. Commentator Mayer says God taught Elijah the value of the hidden life. He had just become famous as an adversary of Ahab, so mighty that his prayers could stop the rain. Now with his newfound fame, God wanted Elijah to hide and be alone with God. Quote, we must not be surprised then if sometimes our Father says, there, child, thou hast had enough of this hurry and publicity and excitement. Get thee hence and hide thyself by the brook. Hide thyself in the Cherith of the sick chamber, or in the Cherith of disappointed hopes, or in the Cherith of bereavement, or in some solitude from which the crowds have ebbed away. In fact, the name Cherith comes from the ancient Hebrew root meaning to cut away, to cut up or off. God had some cutting to do in the life of Elijah during this period. The last word of verse 5, the word there, in most translations, is quite interesting. Technically, look at the sentence again, it does not need to be there, but God had it put there. Why? Theoretically, the ravens could feed him anywhere, but God commanded that it be at Cherith. Elijah perhaps wanted to be somewhere else, or be preaching, or doing anything else. Yet God wanted him there and would provide for him there. When God speaks to us, we need to hear every word, not just those we want. We also need to decipher where it is he wants us at any given point in our lives. This passage is so full of lessons. Here's another key one. Gusick says every bit of food that came to Elijah came from the beak of an unclean animal. Elijah had to put away his traditional ideas of clean and unclean, or he would die of starvation. God was teaching Elijah to emphasize the spirit of the law before the letter of the law. Charles Spurgeon adds to this when he draws 2 points of application from this event, likening the food the ravens brought to spiritual food. First, he recognized that God may bring a good word to us through an unclean vessel, spiritually unclean, like a raven. Second, that one can bring spiritual food to others and still be unclean spiritually themselves. Let me quote Spurgeon. Quote, "But see too how possible it is for us to carry bread and meat to God's servants and do some good things for his church and yet be ravens still." Let's make sure we don't miss either of these 2 points. Now, before we conclude today, you may be wondering, what exactly did the ravens, or where exactly did the ravens get the food that they brought to Elijah? Well, in fact, some may ask, was it really ravens? I say that because some argue, desperately trying to explain the passage, that the word orabim, which in our version has been rendered ravens, to be as the word is used in Ezekiel 27:27, that is, merchants or Arabians in 2 Chronicles 21:16 or Nehemiah 4:7, or the citizens of Arabah near Bethshem in Joshua 15:6 and 18:18. Now the spelling is different by one letter, and thus the common rendering is, in our opinion, preferable to these conjectures. Ravens is preferred. Furthermore, if Elijah was miraculously fed by ravens, as we believe he was, it is idle to inquire or ask where those ravens found the bread and the flesh, for God would direct them. There comes a point where, in the absence of direct textual confirmation, one takes God at his word. Matthew Henry says, God could have chosen angels to bring him his provision as he did afterwards. Chapter 19, verse 5. And as he did to our Savior, Matthew chapter 4, verse 11. But he didn't. He chose to send provision by winged messengers of another nature, ravens, to show that when he pleases, he can serve his own purposes by the meanest creatures as effectually as by the mightiest creatures. And that is yet another lesson for us. But friends, the story continues, as we'll see next time. In the meantime, if you like what you're seeing or hearing, please indicate so on the URL that you're watching. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Digging for Scriptural Gems, where we dig deeply into the Word, almost verse by verse or word by word. Please do so. YouTube, Digging for Scriptural Gems. And finally, I urge you, keep on digging. There's gems in those scriptures. Keep on studying.